Guys and girls, welcome to episode 2 of the Beyond the Pump podcast. Thank you to everyone who tuned in to watch episode 1. The reception has been really good. It's been great. I've had a lot of feedback from a lot of people, what they want to see, what they want to hear me talk about. So it's been great connecting with a lot of people regarding the start and the first episode of the podcast. But moving on to episode 2 tonight. And in today's episode, I want to talk about the real cost behind achieving a great physique or transformation. So I feel like this doesn't get talked about enough, really. You know, we're all on social media. We're all on Instagram, TikTok. And, you know, if you're interested in fitness, and you go to the gym, then you're probably going to be following some fitness accounts, and you're going to be flooded with images of shredded abs and muscular physiques. And a really important point is, for a lot of people, how realistic are these physiques? If you're just going to the gym and you're looking to better yourself, and you're constantly consuming these images of people who, let's be honest, are either, coaches themselves who are, prepping people for kind of photo shoots and helping people become their best versions, or they are more than likely bodybuilders and competitors who this very much is, a lifestyle for them. It's linked to their career. It forms a large part of their identity. And so sometimes it can skew the perception of what is realistic and attainable within a, developing a physique over the course of time, or achieving a transformation. And I think, you have to understand the timelines involved in some of these results that you see. So, sometimes you'll see, take myself, for example, I might, document to a degree where I'm at the start of a prep, and then obviously it ends with me on stage. And obviously the way that I look has changed dramatically. But there was a lot of work that went into that months, years before that. And it has been an accumulation of progress over a long, long period of time. But if somebody didn't know me, or, they hadn't really kind of like followed my journey that much, then they might think that I have achieved that result in, say 16, 20 weeks. And that would be, very misleading. Not that I'm trying to mislead them, but it would be very misleading to them to think that could be, obtainable, or that you could make that kind of dramatic transformation. And also they don't have the same lifestyle, the same 24 hours that I do. I say this to a lot of people that I coach, to a lot of people that I just talk to generally, that, people like myself who are full-time coaches, and I can bend my 24 hours to suit me with whatever tasks that I have to do. It doesn't matter how much cardio I've got to get done, how many steps that I've got to do. If I need to train for an hour and a half, 2 hours, I can manipulate my day to suit me achieving everything that I need to. Now, a lot of people don't have that same 24 hours. They have set hours that they have to work. They can only go to the gym at certain times. They might have other commitments that prevent them from committing to their physique goals to the degree that I can. So it would be unfair to judge themselves by how much progress I was able to make, or how much I was able to change my physique in a certain given time period. And yeah, I think that's something that I see a lot, the kind of the gap between the perception on social media of what is achievable versus the actual reality for most people on what they can do within a set time frame. Now, that's not to say that people can't achieve results. Anyone, if they, make certain changes and they commit to, you know, manipulating certain variables. You know, they're going to start getting more active, they're going to go to the gym more often, they're going to try and improve the way that they train more effectively and progressively as well, you know, do a little bit of cardio, then they are going to see progress. Absolutely, no doubt about it. But it's all, but what the point I'm trying to make with this is to the degree that that you can achieve. And I think that in social media has been skewed a little bit. And, you know, people who are not aware of how long how long it takes to achieve a dramatic change in your physique, then maybe become quite disheartened, because when they start out and they've been consuming this content of these people making, you know, incredible progress in relatively a short period of time, they're then dejected when they don't see that same level of progression. And then that can affect their relationship with, you know, with going to the gym. You know, they might give up because they don't feel like, you know, they're very good, or, you know, they're not doing things correctly because, you know, they're not seeing that progress. And I think this can be, you know, one of the real costs, that people have to understand, how long it takes to kind of like make a very, very, very noticeable physique transformation. And then, you know, I think, again, a lot of people have coaches, bodybuilders, you know, people who have made fitness a huge part of their life as reference points. But what needs to be understood is the difference between, you know, going to the gym just for general health, to improve your body composition, but just generally be healthy, better mental health, feel good, versus when you make fitness a lifestyle because your physique development is a real priority to you. And those two approaches to health and fitness are very, very different. And they require very, very different levels of commitment. And I think that's just something that I really wanted to address because again, I don't think it's spoke about enough, you know, the sacrifices that have to be made to achieve such results over time, and how long and how consistently you have to do it. So that's some of the things that I'm going to be talking about in tonight's episode. You know, so, you know, to give an example, you know, you'll see it, like I was saying, you see a photo and they'll say the time frame, but they've then not gone into detail about how organized they had to be with their time, how they had to plan ahead, you know, all these things that, you know, don't get spoke about. And there's a lot that goes into those transformations. So yeah, it can be misleading. And that's, you know, that makes it difficult for some people, in terms of, and it can be a block in them, like I say, continuing their development in the gym, and, you know, staying with it consistently long enough that they start to then see those results. And trying to reflect on my own experiences and trying to think, at what point did I realize that the cost of achieving the physique that I wanted was higher than I thought? I think when I started to compete, that's when I noticed the jump. I was actually having a conversation with a client today, and we were talking about uh, what we can potentially achieve in the future. And I thought it was a really good question, because it's not something that, you know, I reflect on too often, because I'm so thinking day to day, what do I need to do today? What am I training? That sometimes, you know, because I understand this process is over such a long period of time, I'm not really thinking like too far ahead. You know, I've got an idea, but, you know, I'm not thinking like, where will I end up eventually? I have a rough idea, like I say, in my head, but, you know, that can change over time depending on your circumstances, depending on what direction you want to go. It can change quite quickly. But I think for myself, I started to realize like how much I was going to have to change my lifestyle when I really was thinking about competing. I understood quite quickly the organization that I needed around kind of like prepping my food, making sure that I made time every single day to go to the gym, um, you know, making sure that I was taking my supplements very consistently, making sure that I was getting adequate sleep, that I was hydrated, all these things that before I wouldn't pay as much attention to. And that was really kind of the first time that I thought, wow, I'm going to have to do this very, very consistently for a very long time to see the level of development that I'm aspiring to in the future. In terms of what sacrifices surprised me the most, I would say time management was probably one of the ones for me. I'm a very organized person, as a lot of my clients will tell you. Uh, I like to plan ahead. Very organized. I like things in a set way. I like being in control, but managing my time effectively was probably the biggest challenge, and it surprised me the most. Um, and that's because if I plan things a certain way and they don't go the way that I plan, it can kind of like shake me a little bit. I've got better at over time. Life and bodybuilding in general has just taught me that not everything goes the way that you plan, and you have to be adaptable. And this is something that I've learned. But especially when I was starting off competing, I was very, very rigid. If I missed a meal, I'd be like super stressed out. And now looking back, I realize how unsustainable that was. But at first, I needed to make that level of adjustment because I just wasn't used to it. And so to make those changes, I couldn't just do them half-heartedly. I had to be like absolutely on it every single day, meals at the same time, making sure that I did everything, weighed everything to the gram. And I still do that like very accurately, but I'm way more flexible because I understand that that level of that level of control, although it can be useful because you will make sure that you get everything done, it can actually work against you because it stresses me out when things don't go as I plan. So I think that was one of the, if you want to call it a sacrifice, just the constantly thinking about managing my time and how I was going to make everything work. And that was something that definitely did surprise me. And a lot of times when I'm like reflecting on kind of like how I started my fitness journey and like throughout my fitness journey, like would I have made those same choices again? I guess now I can look back and think I would, because I like where I am now in terms of my, physique, and, love my career, love what I'm doing, love the people that I work with. Very, very, blessed for what I do, and I live every day with a lot of passion. Um, and I guess I needed to make a lot of those, not mistakes, but like sacrifices, and understand what was required to take my physique to where I have, so that then in the future I would be in a position to then help others understand what is required to make that level of progress. And hopefully that's something that I get across quite well to a lot of the people that I coach. And then they can have that same understanding of how consistent you need to be to get the absolute best results. And yeah, I think that's something that again doesn't get spoke about a lot. Um, you know, all these things that you're going to have to change and modify in terms of your behavior and your routine to achieve excellent results. So yeah, moving on to kind of like a further point around time, some of the things again that I think, you know, I needed to understand quite quickly was the amount of time that I would need to dedicate to training. I used to, when I first started the gym, I kind of go into the gym, I'd not really have a plan, I'd mess around a little bit, throw some weights around, maybe be in there for like 45 minutes tops, and then I'd be out. Versus now, there's a much greater total time investment. I'll warm up effectively, do a little bit of mobility work more often than not. I'm not rushing my workouts. On average, I'll probably train at least an hour and a half each day, maybe a little bit longer in a prep environment because my recoverability is a little bit lower. food's a little bit lower overall, output generally is going to be increasing over time. And so that was another, another point around time that I had to understand that if I wanted the best results, I was going to have to take my time. I couldn't rush. And again, I needed to plan effectively. How can I create the situation where I can go to the gym for an hour and a half, 2 hours if I've got cardio, maybe even 2.5 if I need to pose, if I'm getting ready for a competition. So yeah, that was something that really took a lot of adapting to. And fortunately for me, I've built my career around the fact that I can make that probably a big part of my day and make sure that I get all that done. But there was a time where this wasn't my sole career, and I was doing that around normal sort of jobs. I was bartending, personal trainer within a spa. I wasn't in control of my own hours, and that was a real challenge. I had to go to the gym at all different times. I'm fortunate now that I can train at the same time every single day, so it makes my days very, very repeatable, and that makes bodybuilding or developing my physique a lot easier because every day's the same, and I know what to expect. I can plan ahead of time very effectively. But when it wasn't my sole focus, and I had other people deciding when I was working and what I needed to do, it was really challenging. So I'm glad I went through that though, because it made me understand that, like I said before, not everyone has the same 24 hours that I do, and I'm very aware of that. And so I think from a coaching perspective, that makes me a better coach because I can relate to those people, and I understand that it's not as simple as me from the coach's point of view saying, well, you just got to get this done, you need to find a way to do it. It's all well and good saying that, but there's a cost to that. If somebody has to go to the gym like super, super late to achieve everything that you want them to, then they might be sacrificing sleep. They're not going to recover as well. They're probably going to be pretty stressed out as well. So a good coach, in my opinion, is going to have relatable experiences to a lot of people. They're going to have figured out how to manage their time effectively so that they can meal prep, make time for food shopping, weighing all the food, prioritizing sleep, making sure that cardio, steps, posing if you're a competitor practice gets done. Even kind of like if you have to travel and commute to work, then you need to plan your food. You might need to go to a different gym if you're a little bit further away. So all of these things can impact, again, how easy it is for you to constantly make progress to achieve a great physique. I would say like it almost becomes like a job. It's something, it's that demanding and it's that intrusive to a normal person's lifestyle that it's like a second job. And because there's a lot that goes into it. And I think, again, when people are seeing these transformations online on social media, they're probably not at first aware of the amount of time that they're going to have to commit to kind of to make the progress that they want. And then they very quickly will understand and then decide whether that sacrifice of time is going to be worth it to them. Do they really want to sacrifice that much time and give that much commitment to achieving that physique? For some people, yes, but for some people, definitely not. And there's no right or wrong answer there either. Everyone's got different goals. Everyone's got different aspirations in terms of the way that they want to look and feel. But I think everyone wants to be their best version. And so, regardless of how far you want to take it, there is going to be a level of sacrifice, and you are going to have to change the way that you do things if you want to achieve a really incredible result. And that takes me on to the next point, which I think is a really, really important point. And it might sound a bit strange coming from a coach whose role is to provide accountability. Something that I've spoke to a lot of my clients about fairly recently, actually, is when accountability turns into dependency. Now, obviously, with accountability, to a degree, everyone needs it. We all need to be held to standards. And it's not always easy to do that when you're just accountable to yourself. It's very easy to tell yourself in the deep of winter, it's cold, it's dark, that I don't need to get up at 5 a.m. to get to the gym for 6 a.m. to do cardio. It's very easy to convince yourself not to do that. But if you are being coached and you yourself and the coach have kind of come to the conclusion that that's going to be a really good way of you getting in your activity that you need to, your output for the day. It's not going to interfere with your schedule and routine because it's at a time where realistically nobody really wants you. There's a lot of people with careers that they're not doing anything at 6 a.m. in the morning. And so you know that you have to get up and you have to go to the gym to do that, to make sure that you are moving towards kind of like the goal that you've set, not just with yourself, but with your coach. And so, yeah, there are hugely positive sides to accountability. Of course, there is. It provides us with that motivation, I guess so, to a degree, but it provides us with that resilience that we're going to get things done. We've got a goal, and it's a burden shared as well. When it's just you telling yourself, it's just you. But when you're working with someone, you are in that process together, and you are taking shared responsibility for the results that you get. And so, yeah, there's this huge positive sides to accountability, and that's not what I'm trying to say with this point. But where accountability turns into dependency is when people rely on their coach to make every decision for them. So for me, coaching really is providing accountability, providing direction, providing a roadmap for how we are going to take you from where you are to where you want to go to. But along that process, there should be education so that you feel that you're learning as you go along, and so that you feel to a degree that you can do this without the need for a coach. And again, that probably to some sounds strange coming from a coach whose sole purpose is to be that person who is obviously taking them through that process. But definitely an outcome that I have for a lot of the people that I coach is that to a large degree, they feel that they could do it without me. And that's really important because I can't be with the people that I coach all the time. I also can't communicate with them constantly because there's too many of them to do that. And also, I've got my own things going on. I've got my own process going on. I'm training. I've got things to do each day, and so I need them to be able to make decisions for themselves at times, to auto-regulate things depending on the feedback that they might. So for example, training. They might be quite tired one day, and they might just, I will educate my clients to say, well, if you can really feel like a lot of fatigue building up, then that day, maybe just do a little bit less volume, maybe drop the intensity down a little bit. The nervous system will definitely thank them for that. And then the next day, they'll probably feel fine. Whereas if they didn't do that and they just, went really hard that day, then the next day they might feel terrible. They might not be able to do anything that we need them to do. And so that's where, like I say, I need people to be able to auto-regulate decisions from time to time on their own, independent of me as well. And for that, I need them to be able to make decisions. But if they don't feel like they can make those decisions without asking me for any little question that they've got during the process, then that is accountability turning into complete dependency. And that person then may feel very trapped that, they can't do this process without my approval for everything. And to me, that's not good. That's not a good situation. And so education around all topics, whether it be nutrition, whether it be training, how to handle certain situations, what to do in certain situations. I need them to know so that they can manage these situations independently, long term. And then it frees up myself to then think and concentrate on, the bigger picture, some of the bigger moving parts that are involved in a physique transformation. So it actually will allow for a better end result, in my opinion, by the individual who's being coached being able to make certain decisions independently of the coach. And I think any coach who has coached someone for a long time and they've educated them to a high degree, it becomes so great, because at that point it's kind of like a collaboration to a degree. Although the coach is still firmly in control, or should be firmly in control, and driving the direction of where they're going, the individual who's being coached is now at a point where they can actually provide really good feedback on, where they are, and they can actually really start to assist in the decision making for the coach. And that is a truly great position for a coach and a client to be in. And I've been very fortunate that a lot of the people that I've been coaching since I started in 2022 are at that point now where, I've been coaching them for 4 odd years, many of them as well at this point. And we've developed an understanding now that, they'll still ask me things if they feel like they need to. But a lot of the time when they might check in, they're informing me of kind of decisions they made around certain situations. And then the fantastic thing about that is then I can just concentrate on the larger, more important variables that need to be manipulated for them to keep moving forward. And I'm not getting kind of bogged down with deciding things for them that ultimately they should be able to decide for themselves. But they can only decide them things if they've been educated properly on how to make that best decision. So that would be an example of accountability remaining like very good and not turning into dependency. Whereas I see, and I have experienced as well as a coach in my earlier years, where people feel like they can't do anything without you, and then that becomes a little bit of a cage for that individual. And it's a lot more difficult for the coach to then think of the direction of where that individual's going, because we're so focused on micro decisions every kind of like day, and it takes away from the coach's ability to do the best job that they can do. And then also, the client's ability, because they are being so reliant on the coach deciding everything for them. So that, again, that I think that would be a really good example of when accountability can turn and it can become dependency. So basically people lose the ability to like self-regulate themselves and become very dependent. And it's for me, it's not a position I ever want any of my clients to be in, because they will develop like the fear of doing anything because it might be wrong, and they constantly need approval for, to do anything. And again, that's not, in my eyes, that's not a healthy relationship with, training, food, especially. Food's a big one, because obviously, we're always eating, and it happens every single day, multiple times per day. And realistically, a coach can't provide, can't be close enough to that individual or with them enough that they can make those that many decisions that many times per day. So this is definitely where you see there's a big difference between guidance and control. And maybe at first, when somebody doesn't have as much knowledge around nutrition training, the coach it has to be more control, because at the end of the day the individual doesn't know, and so the coach has to decide pretty much everything. But then as things evolve, it's going to become still control, but it will be more guidance as well, because the individual, like I said, will be able to self-regulate things. And for me, ultimately, that's where I want to take most of my clients. I want them to be at a point where they are able to self-regulate things. They are able to, control their own variables to a large degree. And they really just need me to provide an oversight on things that they're doing. And like I say, drive the larger decisions that are going to take them to that goal that we have set, right at the start of the process. So, something I ask myself with this is, at what point does that accountability, become an unhealthy dependency? And I think some of the points that I see is, when people are asking coaches if they can eat certain foods, that should be established quite early on in the process, like the foods that are going to be, beneficial for the result that we've set. What do you digest well? Obviously, people are going to have, they're going to change their food sources from time to time. Social occasions are going to come up. You might, eat out, from time to time, of course, like that's a very normal thing to do. But you should be able to decide what you're eating when you go out, and not seek approval from your coach on that decision. Needing approval basically for kind of like social events. And also, and this has been quite big in the industry at the moment, and that's kind of like response times. A lot of the best coaches will pride themselves on having a very, very fast response time. I think every coach aspires to it. You don't want to leave anyone kind of like, waiting for as long as possible. But sometimes you're just not able to. You're busy. I might be doing something like this, recording a podcast, and I'm just not able to get to my phone whilst I'm doing this. And, people are more than likely messaging me. And so I will do it as soon as I can. But again, when the accountability is turning into dependency, is that an individual's kind of experiencing anxiety because they've not heard off their coach for a little bit. Now, obviously, there are, standards here, and nobody should be waiting too long for a response. There's a lot of discussion in the industry about kind of like check-in response times and things like that. You hear all sorts of opinions on this. But generally, I think most good coaches are going to want to respond as soon as possible. And again, but again, sorry, the individual who's being coached needs to understand that not to think negatively if the coach doesn't get back to them very, very quickly. More often than not, the coach is going to get back to them as soon as they can, because, the coach always, or should always, want what's best for the individual. And so, it would be strange to think that they would want to make them wait for a response. But I guess I kind of have experienced that a little bit myself, being coached before. Especially if you're getting ready for a show, you've checked in and you're waiting. You're at that point in maybe a bodybuilding prep where adjustments are happening quite frequently, and decisions are being made quite quickly on a regular basis, and you are waiting for that next decision, and you might be waiting for any possible changes to the plan, but you're aware that you might, once you've left the house, you won't have the ability to make those changes because you won't have the food with you. So I have experienced that as from the client perspective as well. And it's although I know, and I'm talking about it now, that like, you everything that I've just said, like you can't expect the coach to be, responding like super, super quick, like instantly all the time. I have felt that anxiousness around waiting for a decision. So I do understand it. But luckily I was also able to understand that, you can't expect instant responses all the time. But again, that is a sign where accountability is turning into dependency. So what I learned to do in that situation was take extra food with me. And then if my coach told me to make any changes, I had the ability to. And if the coach decided not to make any changes, I had the extra food with me, but I wouldn't use it. And so that was one way that I learned to remove that anxiety. But my coach didn't tell me to do that. That was just something I self-regulated myself. And and that's the example of a good client in that situation, that they've been taught and they know enough, around nutrition, that they kind of know what to expect a little bit in terms of what foods might be increased in this situation. For example, it would have been that the food would have been potentially increased. And so I took that time to prepare either way. And that was me removing that anxiety then, because when my coach was ready to let me know what either were the adjustments or if there were no adjustments, I was prepared either way. So that was me keeping accountable, but not being dependent on my coach. So yeah, I think that's a nice way to wrap up the accountability turning into dependency. So obviously the more obvious ones, like the social trade-offs, physique goals, especially higher level, often conflict with normal life. By normal life, I mean, what do I mean by normal life? Because I've lived my life as a bodybuilder for most of my life. So my perception of a normal life is probably very, very different to most people's. But I think what I'm talking about is, turning down social events, going to meals out, not drinking alcohol, which at this point I've not had any alcohol for probably about 5-6 years now. Very unlikely to ever drink again, to be honest. And obviously, I'm a competitor. My whole, a lot of my life is built around fitness, and I'm very passionate about it. But that's not to say that that's the thing that you have to do. You don't have to. There are many people who bodybuild and are even heavily into fitness that still drink and they still get great results. So it's not a mandatory requirement that you have to, but it's just, again, a trade-off that some people, to make the most progress, will potentially have to make. Obviously, if we're talking about a very structured diet on a timeline, so we're talking about like photo shoot preps, we're talking about bodybuilding competition preps, or just fat loss phases that require a very, very high level of adherence and, with a very desired outcome, missing events during that time, that's going to be really tough. Or if you do go to those events, you've got the mental strain of like being the disciplined one who, and I've done this, turned up with Tupperware boxes. The one that stands out to me is there was a 40th birthday party, and I went to the event early in like the afternoon on the day of the party, and the party was at the night. And I went to the chefs and I gave them my chicken and rice with vegetables to be served at the 40th party. And the chefs were just looking at me like, what is this guy giving us this food for? Like, why? Like, why are you not just eating with everyone else? And then I had to explain that I was getting ready for a show, and they were just still looking at me very, very oddly. But I didn't care. I was like, look, this is what I do. This is my lifestyle. So can you please prepare this chicken rice and I think it was like asparagus on a plate, and can this be served to me the dinner? And I did, that came out, and everyone was kind of like looking that I was the only one eating this kind of like quite plain chicken, rice, and asparagus. This was in that time of my life where I was like very, very rigid. And yeah, that was something that I just felt was necessary at the time to do. And like I say, I'm glad I did it, because now I can look back and see how ridiculous that was. But I adhered to the plan, and I adapted things, and but that was definitely one of the trade-offs, that I couldn't do what everyone else was doing, and I couldn't be involved like everyone else was involved. And then, a big one is the people around you not fully understanding the commitment. Bodybuilding, and I'm referring to bodybuilding, but it's changed a little bit now. But bodybuilding, when I started, it wasn't a very well known thing to do. The perception around it was very different. A lot of people didn't understand why I would want to do it, but I did. Now it's a little bit different. Social media has changed everything in that regard. It's a lot more accessible now. There's a lot more shows. The federations are a lot bigger. There's a lot more opportunity in terms of, if you are working in the fitness industry, it's quite beneficial to do shows, because obviously it highlights that you are pretty dedicated to your physique, and you can be potentially a reference point for other people. But it's kind of like the trade-off is that you are going to have to sacrifice a lot to kind of like get to that point. And a lot of people are going to potentially misunderstand that level of commitment and, question it. And that can be quite difficult when you're going through that process, because you've chosen to do an activity or a sport, or even if it's a photo shoot, for example. And, not everyone has the same goals in life. And some people will put that on you, maybe not maliciously either. They're just trying to maybe understand why that's important to you, but it's the way that you can interpret that at times, and it can make you feel like your why, your reason for doing it is being kind of like brought into question. And that's again something that is a trade-off, and you have to expect that, because it's so far outside what most normal people, do and would be willing to sacrifice to achieve ultimately a better body, a better body composition. So yeah, that's another one. And yeah, like I say, I've done it in many, many different ways, taking Tupperware to events, leaving events to go and train early. I've sat at restaurants watching other people eat food, and I've just like had nothing, or drank water, or had a black coffee. And for me at this point now, it doesn't really faze me at all. But definitely earlier in my my journey, it definitely was more difficult, because I didn't have as much self-control and discipline as I do now. And so, yeah, it was way more difficult. And at the time, I didn't understand well, I was way more aware of how much of a trade-off it was. Whereas now, I don't really see it as a trade-off, and that's just because time has accumulated, and I'm just way more used to doing it now at this point, rather than when I first started having to do it. It was very different to what I was doing normally when I was younger, and so it was a lot more challenging. And now the people around me are a lot more used to me being that way at times when I'm in prep, or at events. Whereas again, at first, they weren't used to it. And so not only was I having to adapt to the changes that were occurring for me to achieve the results that I wanted, but everyone around me was having to adapt to the changes that I was making to my lifestyle. So yeah, again, it's not just the trade-off for yourself, it's the trade-off for other people that are close to you as well. And so, I guess a question a lot of people ask is, are the social trade-offs worth it? For me, it's an easy answer, like yes. And I still, will, do things. Me and Cal, will, go out for meals occasionally, not while I'm in prep and stuff, and, go to family events, family breakfasts and stuff like that. But it's rarer, and it's not happening all the time, and that's just because the goals that I've set require a very, very high level of adherence. And that's not to say my goals are the right thing to do. They're just my personal goals. And that's the beauty of fitness, though, that everyone can have their own personal goals, and they can do this to very different degrees, and nobody's right or wrong. It's your own process, it's your journey, it's your physique. And as long as fitness is improving your life overall, I think, you know, to what degree you do it is irrelevant, and it's only really important to you. And I would never put on anyone else like what I'm doing. I would never, judge someone else for, going out more, or, going for a drink, or, that's their choice. And, they're not harming anyone, doing that. And they're more than entitled to do that. But at the same time, I'm also entitled to control my environment and work towards my goals. And so, yeah, you have to understand there's going to be a lot of trade offs for that. And as long as you understand that, then you can work around things, and you can plan, and you can try to have a good balance where you still do those things from time to time. But if you do have higher level physique goals, which more and more people are starting to set higher level physique goals now, because they're curious about how far they can take their physique development, then they're going to encounter these situations where they're going to understand that there are sacrifices that need to be made. And so, again, another big cost, unseen cost, I think, is the better your physique becomes, the harder it is sometimes to actually see yourself subjectively. Um, so basically, the better the physique you get, the more potential for body dysmorphia that you might get. Some of the key things that I'll hear from people, in and around me, friends in the industry, people that I'm coaching, you know, always feeling that they're not lean enough. So, I call it the curse of shredded. So when you're dieting and you're getting towards your leanest point, you're you're obviously like very happy with the way that you look. Like visually, you technically at that point are, looking what most people perceive to be your best. But you always want what you don't have. So when you're at the bottom end of a diet and you're, very, very lean, ideally, you're thinking about how much better your training feels when food's higher and your body fat's slightly higher, how much better you recover, how much better you sleep, how much better your joints feel. And so you crave that. And then when you go to that point where you are no longer at your leanest point, but training's like going really well, and everything's great, everything I just described is happening, but then you don't look as good. And so then you want to be very lean again. And this is something that a lot of people get caught up in. You know, they want to be super lean, but then they want to improve. And those two things don't really, they can't coexist together all the time. You have to move the dial towards one or the other and commit to that for a sustained period of time more often than not. I'm not saying there can't be periods of maintenance where you have a good balance between the two, and you potentially recomposition for a little bit at that point. But there is going to come a time where you then need to commit to either getting leaner or creating an environment for growth. And this then starts to lean into that body dysmorphia, because then people get stuck in this kind of like no man's land in the middle, and they don't commit to either. And then they basically end up staying the same. And that's where the intrusive thoughts come in of like, I'm not good enough. I'm not looking better. They don't like any sort of like phase that they're in. Yet they look way better than what they did when they started. And this is something I've experienced myself, and something that I talk to other people about them experiencing it. And it's a really difficult one. It's a difficult one because we're our own worst enemy. We always get in our own way. And this is where having a coach can be a very good idea, because you get out of your own way and you let somebody else guide the ship and make those decisions for you. That's something that you're going to encounter in your physique development over the course of time, is that you're constantly moving the goalposts. The minute you achieve a certain thing that you set out to, before you've even achieved that goal, you've already moved the goalposts, and that's can be incredibly difficult, because you feel like you're never really achieving. You've achieved goals, but your mind had already moved on before you'd achieved them. And so there's a real sense of that you're not achieving. And then that leans into that dysmorphia that you're not good enough, that you're not making progress, and that you're never actually reaching the targets that you set. That also lends itself to comparing yourself to other people. And that happens a lot in this day and age. Obviously, with social media now, every time you go on Instagram, you're flooded again. If you are following fitness accounts, you're flooded with ripped physiques, muscles, and everyone looking their best. And that is going to make you compare yourself to those people. And you don't know their experience, at what point in their journey they're in, and that can actually take away from your own process, because you're so mentally caught up in how far away you are potentially from someone else's physique, that you're now no longer thinking about what you need to do to make your physique better. And it can actually take away from your own process. So again, it's leading into that disordered behavior for you to actually see your own progress objectively. And this is something I think everyone experiences this to varying degrees. I've definitely experienced it. Most people I know have experienced it. I think it's almost impossible not to feel at times with the way that the world is now. But if you can learn to accept that other people have been doing this longer than you, that they are ahead of where you are in your journey, they have different conditions, different jobs, different time. They can maybe give more time to their process than you can. If they've got those different conditions, then they are going to be able to achieve standards that you're not going to. And I think social media amplifies these like unrealistic standards for many people. And it draws them into this comparison culture that can be very difficult to then, once you start thinking like that, it can be very difficult to remove your mindset from that. So this is something I see a lot, and it actually creates the situation where a lot of people have difficulty in actually enjoying the process. And something I say a lot to my clients is that this should be fun. Like, this should be making your life better. At what point did you start trying to get fitter and healthier for it not to be good, for it not to be fun? And I think the pressure that we put on ourselves to look a certain way, to appear a certain way in person and online, it can rob you of the fun in that process. Because as they say, comparison is the thief of joy. And it is very, very true. So even the fittest people that you see struggle with body dysmorphia. It is it possible to have none? I'm not sure. Probably not. I think in this day and age, with, like I say, with social media, probably not. But if you can have that, if you can look at yourself subjectively, look at where you started, look at where you are now, and look at what you're doing to keep moving forward, then I think it gives you the best chance to limit that comparison culture that is almost being encouraged in this day and age. And something that I've spoke to people about, especially people who are competing, at a very high level, or have made, very, very good transformation. One commonality between a lot of those people is that they say at points where they have looked their best physically, they've actually mentally felt their worst. And that's always stuck with me. How can someone be their best physically yet mentally be their worst? And it's because at that point, everything is heightened. Stress levels are high. You're probably comparing yourself more than ever. And so again, it can lend and weigh itself into this disordered way of thinking and rob you of the fun of the process of actually just getting better each day. So this again is another real hidden cost of achieving a great physique or transformation. And then the final thing I wanted to touch on in this podcast today was, and this is something that I can definitely relate to, is when fitness becomes your identity. When your physique becomes your identity, and if you lose it, you basically feel like you're losing yourself. I've experienced this before. It was at times where I've, not been as consistent with my training and nutrition and supplementation, and my physique took steps backwards. I almost kind of like lost myself, and who am I? And you question your own self-worth, and that's not a good place to be in, because just because somebody has a better physique doesn't make them a better person. It's just a reflective that they have done what's needed to make progress consistently over time. And also, when fitness becomes your identity, so some people, where I'm from, they'll kind of know me as they'll know me by many names, actually. Alex, which is my name, but I'll also go by the name of AJ. And I think a lot of people, especially within my local area, they'll just kind of know me as like Alex the bodybuilder, or what would have been like Alex the men's physique guy, but Alex the bodybuilder. And that, I accept that role, and I'm a coach, so it's quite easy for me to kind of accept that that's what people perceive me as. But there's far more to me than just being my physique. And the people that know me and the people that I coach, my friends, like they get to see that side. And that was also why I wanted to do the podcast, so that I could get my personality across more, and not just be my physique, because I think social media does that as well. It reinforces that idea that your identity is your physique is your identity. And that is, that's a dangerous situation to be in, because if your physique is your identity, then there is going to be a pressure to be in shape all the time, year round. And again, as I described before, if you're looking to make the most amount of progress, that is not a good place to be, because then you will be in that no man's land of not committing to either getting leaner or creating the environment to grow and progress. And so that is something that I think I've seen a lot on social media. People just staying too lean year round, because when they're leaner, there is a direct correlation that is almost mutually exclusive, that the leaner you are on Instagram, the more attention you get. It's almost like it's rewarded. And so that is encouraging not only coaches and bodybuilders, but just generally people, everyday people, to look better year round. But the cost of that is that they're not going to make as much progress, because they're not going to be able to create the environment to drive progress. And so again, this is one of the big costs of achieving a great physique or a great physique transformation. And then, you've got the thing that if you stop training, you might decide that you want to take up another activity that is very time consuming, that doesn't allow you to train like you used to. For myself, it might be, it's going to happen one day that I don't compete anymore, and I'm no longer Alex the bodybuilder, and I'm just Alex or Alex the coach, but who gets other people on stage. But you see what I'm saying? Like, you can't let just one or two things form your identity, because if you change direction, or if for whatever reason they're taken away from you, you're left with nothing. And so you need to be more well-rounded than that. You need to be more balanced than that. And that is one of the ways that you will prevent one of the largest costs of achieving a great physique. You almost need to try and think of ways to not let fitness become your sole identity. More difficult to do in reality. You know, in theory, it's very easy, but in reality, it's very difficult, especially for people like me who are coaches. And, you know, a large portion of our life is documenting, you know, what we do for ourselves and for other people. And so it does form a large part of our identity. And I'd be lying if I said it didn't. But yeah, it's definitely a cost that I'm aware of. And it's something that I'm, you know, trying in the background to make sure that I, you know, have other interests and do other things, so that one day when I don't compete anymore, that doesn't affect me negatively. And again, that is one of the things that I think a lot of people are maybe not aware of when they're kind of coming into the coaching space, or even into just the fitness space, or, you know, joining a new gym. You know, I think at first you're not aware of like how much it has the potential to form such a large part of your identity. And again, I think it's because people are unaware of the time commitments that I talked about. They're not aware of how accountability can turn into dependency. Even like on a basic level, like you feel accountable that you need to go to the gym most days, that can turn into dependency. And when you're not able to go to the gym, it can throw people off. How you have to make social trade-offs, how you have to navigate the potential disordered way of thinking that you see yourself, and also how other people perceive you in terms of it becoming your identity. So they're just a few of the things that I think don't get spoke about, don't get addressed about enough. And it's just something that I wanted to cover in this podcast tonight. So that is 1 hour, a 1 hour podcast. So well done if you listened to the end there. Hopefully a lot of you took something away from this podcast, and I'll be covering a lot of different topics regarding, you know, many different things within the fitness industry, different perspectives. I've got a couple of joint podcasts lined up as well. So lots to look forward to. But for now, that is episode 2 wrapped up. Thank you for tuning in, and episode 3 will be soon, guys.